One of the things that I found as individuals try to move up in social classes or you're trying to move up in an organization, you're normally typically constrained to your level, honestly. And that's why networking becomes so key. So I'll give you a great example. Like in corporate America, there's very much an attitude you stay within your pay grade. Depending on what industry you are in, a manager might very well tell you, we didn't pay you for your opinion on this matter. Like, that's not what you're paid for. Do your job and shut up. And they may say it like that, or they may say it nicely, but you get the message. So, what we found is, as it relates to individuals that are wanting to become executives, navigate their careers in a way where there is a clear path to having an opportunity to go into the C-suite or be on the board of a company, a lot of those individuals look around, they're working inside of large multinational corporations, and they go, wow, there are 8,000 vice presidents inside of this company, and only five of us over the next 10 years may have a chance at being promoted. So it almost feels like your career maxes out. And then by the time you have a family and responsibilities, you're just happy to have that. And you're just focused on like your retirement and making sure you keep what you have.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Jabir McKnight, and I'm the host of the Spark Podcast. And I have an incredible guest here with me today, Cortney Woodruff, CEO and founder of Assemble. Thank you so much for joining. This conversation is going to be absolutely amazing. We're going to dive into the relevance of higher education, how we can bring relevance to higher education, entrepreneurship, and the HBCU space. Thank you so much for joining. How are you feeling today?
Good, phenomenal, blessed, positive, productive,
I
all the
love
above.
that.
Yeah. How
Tell me
about
about Assemble. Tell the audience about Assemble. Just high level. What is Assemble? What is the mission? What is the vision? And how did it come to be?
yeah, well, so first of all, thanks for having me. I think the easiest analogy to explain what a symbol is we are serving as a bridge, and on one end of that bridge is just industries and corporations and companies and economies. And on the other side of that bridge is universities and just people in general who are needing to learn. And so what we've found is that education is actually not equitable. And without the proper frameworks or exposure, a lot of people are missing out on the American dream or the first world dream. And so essentially what we do is we started out initially thinking of filling a void where there was a lot of successful people of color around the world, and they're busy individuals. And so you had this huge hole where everyone that's coming up with a dream, for everyone, Byron Allen, a black billionaire, there are hundreds of thousands of African American males wishing that they could be him. And it's just like, well, how do you help those thousands of people learn directly from him? He doesn't have the time, and everyone has a story and a compelling case, but there's just like no way to adequately do that. So we thought, why not create a valuable proposition for successful individuals where we could sit them down and we could kind of work with the team of academics and extract all of the knowledge out of these individuals and format it in a way where it was entertaining and educational to an audience that wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to learn all of these things directly from the source's mouth. Um, and so we pretty much started producing a series of educational courses that were designed by us as well as these successful individuals and giving them an opportunity to share their knowledge within the framework of how did you become successful? How are you an expert in this industry that you're in, but also being very mindful of how do you navigate these spaces while being typically the only person in the room that look like you.
Mhm.
And as that evolved, we saw a lot of success out of it. The first four we did, I just thought of a way to make this a little bit more impactful. And there's just a really huge gap in higher education. You can kind of see it through the lens of what's happening with the Department of Education. It's just all fragmented in college. The way we know it today is probably not going to exist tomorrow. And so we're applying this entire business structure to higher education. So pretty much you take a company and you take an industry like AI. It's evolving every week. There's something new. And then you take a university that's having budget cuts and constraints and they're on the verge of closing, and you think, well, how are they going to position themselves to keep up with what the industry demands from incoming graduates and add it to a curriculum so it's a value proposition to attract students? And typically they don't really have a good answer for that, right? And so what we do is we'll go to NVIDIA or Meta or BlackRock or JP Morgan, and we will work with their executives and their team and say, hey, how about we design a course through the lens of what we do? And then we'll take that course to universities and we'll say, let us supplement your curriculum. Let us bring you up to speed. It's not to take away from what you already have, but instead of you trying to figure out how to hire now an expert in AI to come move to Arkansas or Mississippi or whatever have you, by the time they recruit a professor and then give that professor the right amount of time to create a curriculum or a 4-year program, the industry has changed already, right? And so when you think about it from the perspective of a student, that's 2 years of their 4-year journey in college where they may not have necessarily received something that was relevant as it could be, as it relates to what the industry is demanding from them as they get ready to apply for jobs. And so we're just kind of in that sweet spot trying to make sure that we are in a modernized way, staying up to par with industry trends and providing universities and students with meaningful curriculum and lessons and learnings and insights that are really, once again, coming directly from the source's mouth, source being industry, corporations and hiring managers.
And democratizing education, why is that important from the lens of the corporations? Them being involved and really pouring into the work that you're creating, where's the win-win? What are they getting out of that?
Well, so when you think about the future workforce, there's a few problems on both sides. So for employers, as they try to adapt to Gen Z's behavioral and professional styles, they are reporting back that a lot of the students are not prepared for corporate America, traditionally speaking, as we know it. And a lot of it has to do, obviously, with, some soft skills and some personality traits. But the biggest void that a lot of employers and corporations are seeing as it relates to the existing labor force and where the demand is for jobs is that curriculums that are being introduced and led by universities are typically, 4 years within the business cycle behind. And so they're like, well, we need them to learn about AI, and you all are still, teaching JavaScript and source code. And when you think about it from the university's perspective and the students' perspectives, the reason why this is very important is because of the cost of college. You see the rising debt loads, and it's a burden on the average American and the average student and the family. College has seemed like it has increased over the last 20 to 30 years in price, while the value proposition has kind of declined.
It has. The
Yeah,
statistic is actually 180%. Is a 180% increase since 2000
yeah,
to 2022. That was the last time that was polled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
exactly.
The only industry that has increased more than that is hospital services.
Yeah. So we really have to rethink this thing. One of the exciting things for me is when we work with universities, we understand where they are, and we do look at it from a framework of what is the labor statistics or the Bureau of Labor Statistics telling us, or the population census. And universities think about it like this, but a lot of the average people don't. The birth rate since 1985 up until mid 2015 has declined. So like the mid 80s, every household was almost producing two kids per household. It's now down to like 1.5. So if you're a university planning for the next 4 to 8 to 15 years, you are looking at that birth rate and going, wow, the population of our potential customers, which are students, which happen to be, 10 years old, but by the time they turn 18, they should be applying to our university. That demand pool is dwindling. So it means it's less students competing to go to universities. And so there it means that there's going to be a contraction in the amount of universities that exist. And going back to the point, one of the things that I'm excited about is that when we create curriculum for universities, not only are we saving them money, but we understand our unit economics and the scalability of it. And so if we can offer to them a course that is just as enriching as their most famous course on campus, and that course, just because it's on site, is costing a student $6,000 at a prominent university, and we can be profitable and say, hey, why don't you offer this for $1,000? It's not costing you anything. We've already basically made the investment and underwrit the course and did all of these things. It ultimately means we can pull the price of education down. And that is a very compelling argument because it's driving revenue for the schools. Here's a curriculum. You don't have to worry about capacity or the class is filling up because there's only 40 spots. And by the way, to be clear, our courses are video led, asynchronous, which is popular. And so you could almost have 1,000 students taking a course as opposed to, okay, one professor to 40 students. Now we can only offer it 3 times because that professor is teaching other things. And so you start to have a very compelling argument around the economics of it, as well as the impact and the outcomes as far as the learnings.
So coming directly out of the pandemic, we understand that most universities they didn't have the infrastructure. They weren't even offering online learning. And it was greatly accelerated during the pandemic. Thinking about where you were when you were building out this idea, was it an aha moment when the pandemic arose and it's like, whoa, this is the perfect time for this? Or was the pandemic the catalyst for the business?
It actually wasn't. I was probably 6 months before the pandemic. I was on a long flight to South Africa, and I was really burnt out from my previous company that I had been running for about 10 years. And it was pretty much, we built one of the first digital media platforms for the fitness world. So the vision was almost, how do we build SoundCloud or a Spotify, but specifically for personal trainers around the world that were using social media to kind of upload their content and sell it. So the whole concept of an online fitness challenge was something that we kind of created, seeded with individual trainers around the world, and worked with them behind the scenes on their marketing, their content creation, and just all of that stuff. And so on this long flight, I just remember having an aha moment. We were very close to creating something similar to Masterclass for athletes. And we were negotiating with Ronaldinho, which was a famous, Brazilian soccer player at the time, one of the most famous ever, actually, and Odell Beckham's team. And I just remember having this aha moment, and I just thought, the world will be okay if we don't indoctrinate more parents and kids on the best practices of sports and becoming a professional athlete.
What made you feel that way? You are an athlete yourself.
I was.
Tell me about your personal feelings about, your
You know
high
what it
school and
was?
collegiate journey. Yeah,
Well,
talk
you
to
know,
me.
you know what it was? I think as I was getting ready to pivot our business into that, 2 or 3 months before, I was out in LA and I had gone to a Nike basketball event, but it was under the name of a very famous basketball player. I won't say the name because he has nothing to do with it. And I mean, if I can just be honest and real with you, I spent like 2 hours at this, AAU basketball academy. And when I looked around, you had kids that were, 12 years old all the way to 18. And I just realized how much pressure their parents were putting on them to make it to the league and be the next LeBron James. And I'm James. And, there's, you're in these basketball complexes. There's 8 courts. It's just games going, nonstop.
What's that?
And I'm
Multiple
listening.
games a day.
Yeah, and I'm listening to the scouts talk to the parents, and I'm listening to some of the dads, and they're pointing out certain players like he's gonna be the next one. He's already gotten a scholarship to go to Sierra Canyon, and it's just like a light bulb clicked to me, and I just was thinking like, wow, in our community, parents they make a sacrifice traveling and spending all this money to and we submit our kids into this well-oiled machine that Nike.
It's really an industrial complex at
Yeah.
this point. Yeah.
And it's a well-oiled machine, and Nike's having these events all over the country. And the realities are every 8 years there's a LeBron James, if that. But I'm looking around at hundreds of parents and kids, and some kids are getting off the court and parents are fussing at them. And I'm just like, yo, this is a lot of pressure on these kids. And so as I'm flying, that's what led to that epiphany. And I was like, I don't want to contribute to that. Like literally. And being someone that's been exposed to so many cultures and being blessed, thank you. My parents were very, very determined to do that, expose me to different cultures and ways of thinking. It's not a right or a wrong, but I will say, if you look in an Asian household, Saturdays are for piano lessons, math tutoring, SAT tutoring, and all of these things. I mean, they add up the hours. Come by Monday morning, those kids have spent 12 hours doing things that they can really write about on their college applications, or they've spent countless of hours by the time they're even 15 years old doing SAT prep, ACT prep, just all types of extracurricular activities. And a lot of our community over indexes on the sports field.
It's interesting that you say that because there's using that Kobe Bryant analogy where he's saying, I'm going in and before practice starts at 9 a.m., I'm there at 6 a.m. If you total up 3 hours every day over the course of a year, I'm 2 years ahead of my competition. To your point, it's not always necessarily innate genius, but it's prioritization and where your time is going.
Exactly. And if we and by the way, I'm not trying to offend your viewers or anything. I'm just stating the facts. If we are going to catch up in other areas and aspects of this society, then we have to have a hard reset as it relates to the Black community on making sure by the time our kids are 18, they've had 10,000 hours spent on learning how to code, AI, learning, some of the five romantic languages, just things outside of sports, because the likelihood of those sports careers actually taking shape is very low. And obviously the ones that make it, they do have to put those hours in, but there has to be a balance. And just bringing it back to a symbol, we're trying to, or not even trying, we are taking into account that for all individuals of all races and creeds, and basically being a remedy for it, an outlet. Yeah.
How important is, you're talking about you were going to South Africa. How important has travel been in your journey as an entrepreneur and gaining perspective on what you're putting out into the world? There's this concept of cultural intelligence that I think it's left out of the conversation. We're talking about emotional intelligence and just intellect, but the world is shrinking every day, whether we are competing for attention on social media, if you're competing for a spot at an elite university on an applications process, or you're competing for funding for your entrepreneurial venture, your understanding of how people are going to interact with the things that you create or what you put out into the world is becoming more and more important. And I do feel, as Americans, feeling like we're always at the center of everything, there is a lack of understanding sometime about how everyone else is interacting with things in the world. But the world, everyone else in the world understands how we're interacting
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like English is the world's language, but sometimes if you meet people where they are, they're a little bit more inclined to be receptive and warm towards you. I've been very fortunate. I mean, a lot of people know that's close to me. I think in my 20s, I how many countries did I live in? 3 continents, 5 countries. I think it was, I lived in Spain, China, Taiwan, and Singapore, and the United States. So I was always like half and half on, half off. But I'm personally a really big historical nerd. I love studying foreign cultures, the politics of it, going all the way back to the early or the late 1800s. Typically, it's just cool to know all of these things, but then you can actually start pattern matching and connecting dots that you're not even aware exist. And it's really helped me in my professional career as well as my personal life, just because oftentimes as a African American, most people already have a preconceived notion of you. And so they're not really expecting too much. Demand a lot, but don't expect a lot from us at the same time, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so when you're meeting someone from the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia or Iran or China, and you can speak a little Farsi or Arabic or Mandarin, or you can just tell them a little bit about what's going on in their country currently or the history of it, they're like, wait a minute, what? And people take a liking to you, or they're a little bit more receptive. And, you know, I raised my first $1 million for our first company in venture capital because I moved to China. And so,
Were you fundraising before and then you went to China,
yeah,
or were you
yeah,
already in China? Tell me about that. That's interesting.
yeah, um, random enough, but I'll take you back. When I was 22, I was very fortunate and I went away to business school in Europe. And I did the first year and realized very quickly I did not want to pursue an MBA because I wasn't going to do consulting, and nor was I going to do investment banking. But I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. So I moved to Silicon Valley. And I actually gave up everything, all the financial security of being a student and all of these things. And I said, I'm going to earn my dues. So I lived in someone's garage while I built out the first company, the business plan, and found the teammates to help and wrote the code and did all the networking and understanding the landscape of being a tech entrepreneur as it was mandated by, the higher ups of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And it just so happened you make friends, you're living in a hostel or you're meeting people. And fast forward, we had the company operating, we moved to LA, and maybe a year and a half later, I remember for me, it was very interesting. What I thought was the lowest point of my life ended up being a blessing. And so, long story short, had an issue with a co-founder. It was just getting too bumpy and rocky for them. And so they decided that they were going to clear our bank accounts out and flee and move to Europe. And that happened. So I can
How
only
much?
it was approximately $39,000 at the time. It
And what
was,
year was this?
oh man, this is a while ago. This is probably like 2014, maybe.
I need the audience to understand because $39,000 in 2025 money versus 2014. Still a lot of money, but wow. Okay,
Well,
keep going.
the amount wouldn't be so bad had not the week that it happened, we actually had finally made the business work. So once again, think about it like this. I'll paint the scene. You are trying to create Apple Music for fitness, right?
Uh-huh.
You've been begging and pitching and soliciting trainers all around the world for 3 years because there was the year I dropped out of school and I stayed in Europe basically eating rice and beans and pan, which is bread, loaves of bread, for like a year because I no longer had financial aid. And then there's a year where you're homeless, living in an air mattress in someone's garage in San Jose. And then there's a year where you finally move to LA and you launch the business, so you have a little bit of credibility. And so I vividly remember we had always had this vision where you have a workout program. We filmed these amazing commercials. We had marketing plans, and it was just very comparable to what Apple Music was doing. I mean, like you've never seen a personal trainer announce a 30-day fitness challenge that looked like a 30-second teaser to a world tour from one of your biggest artists. And so it was a moment where we had like 6 of our trainers releasing within the same week. Like we had all these ideas, like who's gonna chart, and it was like we had programs for like women in Europe, and we had something for an audience in Africa, and then we had something for plus size people. It was just booming. So that 38 grand came within like 48 hours of pre-sales, by the way. So $10 to $15 challenges. So it actually was a really big deal because you divide 38,000 by $15 transactions, and that meant we were cooking.
Yeah.
So yeah, imagine your site crashes, they lock you out of it, and they withdraw all of the money. So now all this time that we've spent building our reputation amongst the artists or the trainers goes down the drain because they are finally using our site and it crashes. They don't know that we have no way of giving them the money that they have legitimately earned that's sitting in escrow for the pre-sales. And so long story short, the way I thought that I was going to lose my mind. There's been many times now, but the first time if I ever thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown, it would have been then. And I don't think I slept for like 2 days straight. And I got a random phone call for one of my roommates in Silicon Valley. He goes, "Hey, one of my investors happens to be in LA. He's from China. He's in town. He's looking for companies to invest in. You want to have lunch with?" And I'm like, "Of course, I would love to." And I remember going to the Langham Hotel in Pasadena, which is it used to be the Ritz. It's this huge place, just massive complex. It's just a Chinese guy. He comes and he's like, "How's it going?" I'm showing him what we're doing. By the way, not telling him our whole site just got hacked and co-founders disappeared or any of this stuff, right? And my friend,
You can paint that picture later.
yeah, yeah, I can explain it because we're gonna figure it out. Like at this point, I had called some goons all around the world to track this man down. But long story short, the friend said, "Look, he invests on site. Here's the term sheet. He's already comfortable with it. Just be confident. Tell him your business. You have the numbers." And we did a $500,000 deal within 30 minutes. And so
How much? What was the structure of the deal? How much equity did you give up?
So back then, now everyone uses safes, but back then convertible notes were really, really, really prevalent. And I think it was a it's been so long ago, excuse me. I think it was just like a convertible note with an $8 million valuation cap with like a 20% discount or something like that. Yeah.
For our audience, that what is a convertible note?
So a convertible note is simply a debt instrument, and essentially when you're investing typically in a early stage tech company, companies for a variety of reasons, it becomes very onerous for them to just sell equity directly. It becomes very expensive to actually formulate all that paperwork. And so what typically happens, which is very standard across the board, is a debt instrument is issued. So it will say, "Hey, you're early, give us a loan." And as the company grows into the next round of financing from sophisticated investors who actually will purchase equity because we'll have the money to handle all the legal fees and things, we'll make sure that the value of the company as your loan expires or matures, it's going to convert now into stock with these next guys that come in. But also, there's two things that's to keep in mind. There's a cap. So if these new investors are coming in now and the company's worth 20 million, we can agree now you won't get diluted. Your 100 grand will basically be valued at a 4 million, go into a company that is valued at $4 million. So that's what the cap means, right? So you don't have to worry about, wow, my 100,000 is nothing going into a company worth 20 million. It's like we can agree today we're going to get it up to 4 million and it won't go up, through that ceiling. And then the other thing is the discount. What you also can say is like, and you get a 20% discount, which is if let's just say those investors come in at 4 million and not 20, well, you're going to get a 20% discount on that.
Mhm.
So your 100 grand will go in at what, for what's that, 3.6 million? That's 20% of 4 million, I believe. My math's right.
That's right.
No, 3.2, I believe. I can't remember right now. So, and then you have the maturity date, like this loan expires in 18 months, and then you have a coupon rate. So on top of that, 5% coupon, which means like we're going to add 5% interest annually onto your $100,000. So then that means when it converts, you have 105,000 in principal that goes into the value of the company, and then you get your equity.
So He wrote the check. How did you get to China?
Ironically, struggling to fundraise in America, it was just very hard back then as an African American. Silicon Valley was definitely not as diverse as it is now. I mean, there wasn't a lot of exposure for people of color, and there was definitely not a big network. And one of the same people that allowed me to live in their house when I was in Silicon Valley, fast forward 3 years down the line, we were just catching up. It's like, man, I'm really having a hard time fundraising. It's just challenging. Like I don't know where to turn. I mean, thank God the company is self-sustaining. We're making good money. We're generating cash flow. And at the time, he was getting ready to start a new company and he was getting ready to travel back to Taiwan, where he was from. He said, well, why don't you just travel with me and meet all my investors? Like, I'm happy to share them with you. And that led to me going to Taiwan. Was bold enough to just go to a startup competition in Taiwan. I remember designing flyers on the flight, and I knew I was going to go to a competition, so I designed like a science fair project. I designed everything that would go on it. He took me to a local print shop, and I just presented my company. And after the event, everyone goes to like a happy hour or a mixer after. And I just remember sharing a taxi with a guy that I saw on stage that looked half Chinese, but he looked half white, but he had a very polished, like Northeastern, English dialect. And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, "You want to share a taxi?" I was like, "Sure." He's like, "So what are you doing here?" And then it turns out he's like, "Oh yeah, my wife's a yoga instructor. Like, I definitely understand your business." He's just like, "Let me know if you want to ever come to China." And I'm like, "All right, cool." So the guy follows up with me for like 6 months, like, "How's it going? How's it going?" And finally one day I took the call. He's like, "You should come to our accelerator in China." And I check it out, and his name is William Balbine. He's invested in all my companies now, including Assemble. And it turned out he was like the most prolific angel investor in China.
Wow.
So yeah, he brought me to China and set up shop. And it was the weirdest thing, but as a early stage founder, Asia really turned into a home away from home. It was the first time I felt community, felt resources, and people were just, no matter what level they were in the ecosystem of social economic class, everyone was very friendly and willing to help the next generation of, business leaders, which was for me quite the opposite of being in America.
Wow. So the advice that you have for the audience is make sure that you split the tax. Got it. Um,
And be open-minded. Be open. I honestly, being a young black male, I think I cannot remember now how long ago this was. Yeah, so like, being like 25, 26, I was scared out of my mind to go to China. Because China just felt like a different planet, not a different country. There's different internet rules, there's different laws. You've been indoctrinated to think, oh, it's communism here versus a democracy, in the Western world. So I was just intimidated and scared. I just took a leap of faith. I guess I used my entrepreneurial gene. Sometimes you just got to roll the dice.
I love that. I love that. So, do you feel that things have shifted? You said it was a stark difference between, what was going on in Asia and how they were willing to invest in, diverse founders versus Silicon Valley. How has that shifted in Silicon Valley since it's a little bit more diverse now? And how have you contributed to that? I'm sure you've been there for so long. Or how do you plan to contribute to? I know that you're working on an executive network. How is that contributing to further diversifying networks and opportunities for fundraising?
Well, so it's two things to keep in mind as it relates to me going to Asia. At the time, all of the capital inflows, all the like outward flows were going into China. Their GDP was growing. Wall Street had made a big commitment to basically expand their factories and make a large investment in China. So basically create more and more goods and services to then sell back to the West. So China was very welcoming at the time. This is pre-Trump, to foreigners coming in and making capital investments, right? Um, Now, as you fast forward, there is more of a nationalistic approach, and obviously you hear about tariffs and things, but it's more of a, us versus them perspective. And I would say that climate has now migrated probably to the Middle East. So that's just to give the audience context. Timing and what's going on politically is always very, very important. In fact, it's so important. I remember spending 6 months in China and having closed about 1 million in investment, and Donald Trump was elected. And I remember when he took the phone call, when he got into office, he accepted the phone call from the Taiwanese president before he accepted the phone call from Xi Jinping. China kind of had their own form of tariffs, literally, and they stopped all capital outflows from China to America. And within a week's time, that entire round of financing went down the drain because it was illegal to send money out of China and invest in American-based companies. So that's a whole nother roller coaster. As it relates to Silicon Valley being diverse, yes, it we have come a long way from where we were when we started. However, I fear for as far as we come, we did not gain enough leverage to actually be decision makers in that industry. And it is advancing so fast, and the people that are in control are they have so much financial capital and political capital that things in a way are now just as worse as they were prior to. And not to sound pessimistic, but that those are somewhat the realities of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's pessimistic. I think, to you have to diagnose the problem before you can come up with the solution. It's
Yeah.
reality. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but I think we're facing that whether you're in Silicon Valley or you're in New York, or you're in Philly or anywhere in the United States right now. We're getting squeezed.
Yeah. And you asked about how we're like contributing. One of the things that I found as individuals try to move up in social classes, or you're trying to move up in an organization, you're normally typically constrained to your level, honestly. And that's why networking becomes so key. So I'll give you a great example. Like in corporate America, there's very much an attitude you stay within your pay grade. Depending on what industry you are in, a manager might very well tell you, we didn't pay you for your opinion on this matter. Like, that's not what you're paid for. Do your job and shut up. And they may say it like that, or they may say it nicely, but you get the message. So, what we found is, as it relates to individuals that are wanting to become executives, navigate their careers in a way where there is a clear path to having an opportunity to go into the C suite or be on the board of a company, a lot of those individuals look around, they're working inside of large multinational corporations, and they go, wow, there are 8,000 vice presidents inside of this company, and only five of us over the next 10 years may have a chance at being promoted. So it almost feels like your career maxes out. And then by the time you have a family and responsibilities, you're just happy to have that. And you're just focused on like your retirement and making sure you keep what you have. And so you never really get a chance to speak to people above you, senior leadership and management. I mean, these companies are huge. Some of these companies have tens of thousands. They're like a nation state in and of themselves. So you're kind of stuck talking to your peers, and everybody's kind of thinking the same thing, but scared to say it. And there's a lot of politics. So what we're unveiling and announcing, and it probably by the time this interview comes out, we'll probably be live, but we're creating an exclusive membership network for future C-suite executives and board directors. And the goal is for you to not only have peers that are very ambitious and want to become an executive for the future, but we're curating and programming experiences offline as well as online that are being led and driven by C-suite executives across Fortune 500 organizations and board directors. And so it kind of creates this safe place for you to network, meet ambitious people, and get the tutelage that you necessarily want to figure out, okay, I'm 35 now. If someone tells me what I need to do over the next 6 to 7 years to position myself, the chances of me going from having a $200,000 salary every year, I may actually get that position where it goes into a seven figure digits. And a lot of people don't have that because, once again, you don't get to network and talk and learn directly from senior leadership within your organization. So you definitely don't get a chance to do it with individuals across a of institutions.
What's going to make this particular platform different than other membership platforms that are seeking to bridge that same gap? Is it the distinct network that you have, the commitment and other factors of Assemble that you feel is going to basically give you the competitive edge over other organizations that are doing similar work?
Yeah, well, I don't even look at it from a competitive point of view. I just look at it as I speak to my peers, as I speak to people older than me, and there's just a huge void. And I think one of the things about Assemble is we're true to our name. So we do have a really good pipeline of executives across some of the largest and most prominent organizations around the world. Our membership community consists of people around the world. And it's almost like when you go to Harvard or Stanford or whatever university, when you go into a business or graduate program, part of the allure is the fact that you're going to be networking with people, right, of that caliber. But then the trade-off is if you go to Harvard, you can't network with people from Stanford. And if you go to, University of Dallas, you can network with people from Princeton and Oxford and so on and so forth. So one of the things is really bringing together all of those communities and individuals from those different places so that you can network with one another. But the other thing is just purely like our craftsmanship and our programming and what we have available to our members. And then a really good component of it is our tech platform that we built around it, where instead of you booking an Airbnb, you can go to our site and you have all of these board directors and Fortune 500 executives, CEOs, CMOs, CFOs, and they're available for you to schedule one-on-one call time with them.
So, what is in regards to the selections process? How is that going to be, and how do you ensure that these executives that you have that are participating, their time is being used wisely? Is it a limited amount of capacity in regards to the conversations that they're having? Is there a matching process? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, the first thing is curating a lot of them, right? And then there's designing programming that fits their schedule. So, you know, in different cities, there are, local events and meetups, and then there's online programming, webinars, and on very esoteric topics sometimes that people don't even realize. It's like, okay, you want to be on a board? Have you ever heard of do you even know what it means to join an audit committee? And although it sounds good to be on a board and you get paid 300,000 to an extra $500,000 a year, do you understand the work it entails? The average, junior level vice president doesn't, but it doesn't mean that they're not willing to work hard towards it and position themselves to get those opportunities. So having people and designing programming that is very catered to these type of topics is very important for us. But then as it relates to like the one-on-one call time, it's a market. It's a free market. So the way it works is we have individuals, they allocate time, they set a rate, and it's first come, first serve. But it's once again, they are available. And never before have you been able to book a call freely with Obama's former, Secretary of Education, who sits also on the board of AIG. So yeah.
I love that. And what I love about Assemble, I'm just knowing your personal journey. For
Hmm.
those that are listening, Courtney and I met I got introduced to Courtney at Soho House just in passing. Any shout out to any. He's like, wow, I think you guys should connect. And, know that you were busy building out a presentation deck. You were locked in, you had your beats on, and you made time for me, right? Like you stopped and we might have been talking for at
Yeah.
least an hour.
Yeah.
And then we connected again when you came to Washington D.C. So I know that you're very intentional, and we talked about your background. But what I love about Assemble, and there's no pun intended, but it's like also like a assembly of like all of the tools that you've had in your toolbox and the lessons that you learned along the way
Hmm.
in one platform,
Hmm.
right? Like when you're talking about democratizing education and also providing an opportunity for corporations and for universities to get the best bang for their buck, right? You
Hmm.
knew that
Hmm.
because you went to a HBCU, Alabama A&M, right?
I
And
did.
then you went abroad to ISE.
ESA, well, the Spanish version is ESA, IESE. Yeah.
Yep. And you went there and you understood this is a very prestigious university
Hmm.
and you understood those gaps, right? And, even going to Silicon Valley and connecting and having that one on one support,
Yeah.
right? And someone pouring into you and believing in you. I'm just hearing like even the investment portion and like what it takes to really create something and go into those accelerators and building those relationships. I see how that all shows up in the platform, right? Like from the expert led sessions to the one on one coaching to this network that you're creating. Like, is that like how this came to be? Where you like, do you journal? Like, how are you reflecting and kind of bringing these things to life?
Going back to that trip to South Africa, the other component as to why I wanted to start this company was because I honestly had grown frustrated and angry looking internally at our community. And one of the things that exists today and it existed yesterday and a few years ago is that the Black community, we do a really good job of leveraging PR and shaping narratives, and it's hustle culture. And so what typically happens, I can look at my 18 or, 21-year-old self, you're big-eyed, you're reading these stories about all of these people and you have all this energy and you're willing to, go to Timbuktu to meet them and tell them their story and think that, you're deserving, you're not entitled, but you can prove yourself to get a piece of their time. And typically, behind closed doors, a lot of people aren't as nice as the press makes them out to look, or the speeches they give on stages, or the adulation that the community gives them. And so I was just very frustrated by that. Just once again thinking, wow, I just had to go to China just to feel like support, and I got it in China before I got it in my own country, whether it was from, white people in Silicon Valley or black people just across the country. It just didn't exist, to be honest with you. And what I found was once, the Soho House, activities and the press and stuff came, people were a little bit more inclined to help. It's like, wait a minute, my merit hasn't changed, my accomplishments haven't changed. It's just, the positioning. And sometimes I get it, but oftentimes I struggle with thinking like our community is not in the position to only award uh, PR facing individuals. And so, sorry to go off on a tangent about this, but that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start a symbol because I thought like, okay, I spent my entire you can only imagine the energy and how lonely it was and how brave I honestly had to have been to have gone to all of these different countries trying to build something on my own. It's very scary and lonely and isolating, to be honest with you. And I thought if I can solve this problem, literally you can save the next future CEO of a big company that will look back and employ tens of thousands of people. You might be able to shave off 7 years of just treachery on their journey. Because when you look around at our peers, sometimes people from other communities they beat us just because they haven't been worn down and beaten down to shit. Like we beat each other down. The hazing doesn't exist. There's people that I've literally had to chase down for 8 years, and then you finally have a conversation, and then they're like, they realized like maybe they were being not the nicest of people, and they missed out on opportunities just because they wouldn't respond to your email. And you're like, yeah, man, I was just trying to add value. Like, I don't believe in just asking people for things and not having an equal transfer of value, regardless of even if it is a billionaire. Maybe you send them deals or something. And so, yeah, a symbol is definitely rooted in that. Like, how do we democratize all of this stuff and work and allow each other to work smarter, provide exposure and allow people to leave their, keep burning their candles. Like a lot of people's candles and flames just burn out, man. You know?
There's a saying that, me lighting your candle doesn't dim mine.
Yeah,
I can light yours with my candle and we both can be great. To the
yeah,
point that you just said,
yeah.
you're chasing people around. How much energy does it actually take to sit down with me and have a coffee when you are already going to have coffee that morning anyway?
Exactly. And if you remove the ego, you can have boundaries. You just never know the journey, man. Like being in someone's garage and them inviting me to go to Taiwan with them. They didn't go, I'm raising money myself. So once I get this done, I'll connect you with my investors. Bruce literally said, I'm going over to meet some investors. You can pitch them too, because in his mind, he's like, I mean, they may not like my deal, but they might like yours. They might like both of ours, but there's just like no gatekeeping, so to speak. And like that is what we're trying to do. I'll give you like, even with a symbol, you got to think, man, like when we produce these online courses, it comes out polished, and to the consumer, it's like, wow, I have 15 videos or episodes and I can learn. Well, behind the scenes, it's probably taken a year to get this person scheduled. It's probably taken 10 grand in legal fees or whatever to go back and forth and negotiate contracts, because a lot of these people are signed to large talent agencies, and there's just all this back and forth redlining and contracts. Then there's the timing of it all, because maybe now they're doing something and they can't focus on education or whatever it have. And then there's the actual production and filming and sequencing of all of this stuff. And for the consumer, we want to take that 1 year process and turn it down into a click of a button. Oh, I'm just going to learn from this person. There's no wrangling. And the same thing with the platform. Like, oh, I just want to have a phone call with this person. All I need to do is click a button, schedule, and pay. So you tell me, I think it's really solving a big problem, which is how do we
Absolutely.
connect human capital to human capital?
So I love that. What are some of the bumps in the road or roadblocks that you face when engaging universities, right? I know universities are very partial to PhDs and academics, and something that you said earlier, right? Like sometimes people are focused on solving the problems of yesterday while preparing for tomorrow. They just don't even know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some universities, I think some universities do it well, but a lot of universities are typically behind the eight ball. And by the time they realize what you're offering, there's an additional tax on top of that because they didn't take the first offer. So I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you've ran into, and how did you mitigate those solutions for people that are trying to get into, like the educational line space or ed tech?
Well, so universities are very bureaucratic, right? And then you have to think also, we have to be very diplomatic, because what we're offering could come across as a threat to professors. Like, you're replacing us? Like, no, we just want to compliment you, right? And so you find different universities have different cultures. So for example, like Arizona State is very forward thinking. They're pretty much YouTube University as it relates to colleges, right? A lot of colleges aren't there yet because they're ran by people from academia versus, University of Arizona's president's Michael Crow. He led the CIA's venture capital wing. So it's very innovative thinking type person, and you can feel it within the culture and you can see it with what they're partnered with. But for us, it's still early stages, and it's like pulling teeth sometimes to talk to the universities. And you can also just see culture and professionalism amongst, certain universities, and they're just trying to figure it out right now, honestly. There's so much going on with the Department of Education. There's also, once again, going back to that labor statistics fact, they're already trying to figure out, like, how are we planning to be here in the next 8 years? And so there are just so many challenges. What I found is, watch the demand pin up and then just offer, the supply. So 2 years ago, specifically with HBCUs, we were like, hey, there's this thing coming down the line. And if Trump wins the presidency, it could be really, really dark for you as a HBCU, because the federal government has typically stepped in to provide something that southern states didn't, because they were quite hostile to, our HBCUs, which the majority of them are pretty much scattered across the southern region of the country, conservative red states. And, to be honest with you, no one listened. No one responded. It was hard to get meetings. It was hard to get calls. And in a way, it felt like Noah building the ark and saying, it's going to rain on your head." And now it's raining, and then it's raining really hard. And so we're just, sitting back, and that's faith. Like, I have a pretty good gauge on like seeing things 2 to 3 years before they happen. And that's just from, having an economics major and living around the world. You can just kind of see history repeat itself. And so we've just like been head down preparing. So now those meetings are a little bit easier. And once again, and we want to help. So you said something earlier, which we could very well take that approach, which is like there's a tax associated with this now, but I don't want us to be rooted in capitalism like that all the way. I think that's one of the reasons why we are where we are. What I want to do is transform a university, then you transform a generation of students, and then you can transform the world. And I think it's easier to do that if we work with the universities, being empathetic to where they are and where they stand, and having them meet us halfway, as opposed to saying, hey, we have a solution and now we're going to gauge you.
I love that.
Yeah.
Looking forward to 2030, how do you just see the university landscape changing? We talked about the rising costs. We know that, there's a lot of conversation around, consolidation of universities. You're seeing universities buy other universities and merge, right?
Yeah.
And, the higher education space is very competitive, and you have universities that are trying to do everything well instead of understanding where their bread and butter is and living in that. Like if you're a commuter school, you're a commuter school. Like lean into that. We're seeing, I think, some of the most innovative work in higher education has happened like at the community college level because they know their audience. They know like hyper focus on who their audience is, what they need to provide, and what those students come with and how to prepare them to get them to the next space. So just thinking ahead to the next decade, what changes do you see? Like you said, you're always 3 to 4 years ahead. We're almost in 2030. What do you see?
I see student choice, I see parents' choice, and I see hyper customization of education. So obviously with AI and tools of that nature, people are going to have very personalized educational experiences. I also think that the price is going to go down dramatically because you have a lot of innovative companies that are challenging and basically taking the demand for university or 4-year degree as we know it away from universities. So they're going to have to lower their prices while also trying to figure out how to increase their offering because there's, kind of a saying right now within, education, the diploma is not as valuable as it once was. And so now you're seeing like all these certificate programs and things. And that's coupled by the fact that we don't even know what 40% of the jobs that are going to be in demand are going to be by 2030.
Yeah, there's a PwC report on the 2030 future workforce, and it has 4 different sections. To your point, I mean, this is a very in-depth study, and there are like hypotheses about where they could go because we don't know.
We
Is
don't.
it strictly automation? Are we translating into a model where those you have, managers that are, like you said, MBAs, and then you have operators that are technical, and then there's everyone else? Or is it something else?
Yeah, and what happens if employers just decide to go into an educational space and say, we'll just train you exactly what we need? And someone that's 18 is like, one day I want to work for Meta. I'm not going to college. I'm going to take their specific 2-year track
Like
because
a like its own vocational school.
yeah, it's on vocational school.
Wow. Scott Galloway talks about that in his No Mercy, No Malice newsletter about the need for some of these corporations, more of the giants, like you said, Apple, Google, Nvidia, them creating their own mini universities, which would reduce the cost of education.
Because they have it internally for their employees. So what is it for them to now leverage AI and build it externally for future students and train you, it give you exactly what they want you to have in order for you to come in and be a competent addition to their workforce. So just going back to your question, it's definitely going to be an environment of agility, agile organizations, universities being the organizations, are going to thrive. And I think that those that are latent with their responses to innovate and figure it out or going to shut down. It's going to be a consolidation. I mean, one university right now is closing every week in America as we know it. So that's where we are. I need to get my charger. Sorry about that.
You're good. I can cut it.
Okay, I just realized it was like, I thought I had it charged up for you.
Super insightful. Funny enough, this happened to me when I did a recording about 3 weeks ago. My computer was about to die.
Okay, all right, I'm back. Sorry about that.
You're good. You're good. So, looking towards the future, as you said, right, we're going to have these corporations stepping in. What is one piece of advice that you have for students and professionals on future proofing their careers? What would that be? Just knowing what we just talked about, and we don't know exactly what's going on, but looking towards the next decade, right? Like, we see there are massive cuts in the federal government right now. Of course, automation is being input into so many of these, whether they're, large scale startups or established companies, they're making cuts. The environment is becoming very competitive. For those that are looking to pivot, or those who are just hanging on and they need to upskill, or students that are in college, or parents who have kids that are in high school, what do they need to be working on right now from your perspective?
You know, this is very simple advice, but we live in a world now where CEOs and executives and decision makers are very outward facing. And we live in such an incredible time where everyone has their own personal brands. You used to not be able to hear CEOs speak unless the comms department signed off on a press release and they made a blanketed statement that sounded like ChatGPT wrote it. But now CEOs are writing posts, hiring directors are writing posts, and you can really get a gauge of what they're thinking about, what their opinions are, what their views are, and what they're passionate about, whether it's across LinkedIn or social media or television. And so one way to future proof is just to do your research and keep up with leaders and decision makers of industries and then of the specific companies that are within the ecosystems that you're interested in. And now you're able to have competent conversations. You're able to be in the know, and you're able to understand what it is that they're looking for. And that kind of helps you create a framework to decide, going now back to what we were talking about earlier, where to invest the hours of your time to develop your skill sets.
Wow, you're preaching. At Dream Beacon, that's something that we talk about a lot, right? Starting with the end in mind and working backwards, but also identifying what you said, right? Which is, those support system, those mentors, those that you have, and where the gaps are. And then who are your influencers? And they don't have to be people that you know, but who is influencing you to want to go down the path that you say that you want to go down? And how well do you actually know them? There's a beautiful book, How to Steal Like an Artist. Have you ever heard of it?
No, yeah, I actually have, but I have not read it.
Please read it. It's really short, but when we look at so many of these profound figures, a lot of the beauty and what they've created and put into the world is a culmination of the things that has influenced them, their own experience. When they meld that together, you create something new, right? Like nothing is new under the sun. So, sometimes when I'm interacting with younger people, we all want to just create the newest thing, but no, there's building blocks. Your experience is unique to you, but how have those that have come before you, those titans or those people that you're influenced by, how did they create it? Right. And you talked about that earlier in regards to the PR, and we're so caught up in the allure of what's put out versus understanding down to childhood what made up this person. What was that first
Yeah.
deal?
Yeah,
What was the resilience that was needed to get to where they were going? And
absolutely.
how that actually matches up with your journey. You may actually understand that you're closer to that person than you think.
Yep.
They're just 20 years ahead of you because they got a little bit more experience, but you are on the right track.
Yeah. And then also, I think we highly underestimate the need for soft skills and emotional intelligence that actually makes a lot of business run and the world run. I mean, you think about just even Capitol Hill lobbying or, senator, whipping votes up. You got to have really strong people skills. And I love reading biographies of successful business leaders. And typically, those biographies always tell you how this person grew up. And you can start to see like how their personalities were shaped as they were teenagers and adolescents. And then like how those character traits like served them or was a disservice to them, in business. Like Steve Jobs was adopted and he had this like renegade spirit, which like had his bad side, but then that renegade in him is what allowed Apple to become what it was. Talking once again about, living around and how understanding different cultures really helped me. Well, I love the story of J. Paul Getty of Getty Oil. At one point in the late 1800s, he was the wealthiest man in the world. And part of the wealth came from him expanding the oil business in the Middle East and being able to get deals done before Rockefeller and Standard Oil was able to get into that region of the world. And the only reason why the sheikhs of the Middle East actually was doing the deals with him was because they found out in his childhood he had a very uncanny ability to learn a new language within like 3 to 4 months. So he spoke Arabic. And so the Arabs felt a little bit more comfortable doing business with him because he met them halfway and he spoke their language and they were giving him the deals.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to speak to I'm a Gen Zer technically, right? I was born in 1997, so I'm right on the cusp. I remember some things. People like the term zillennial is like right in between. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to lean with Gen Z. That being said, what is something about Gen Zers that you admire? And then we'll talk about the flip side. The other side is like something that you feel Gen Zers need to work on.
Oh man, that's a really good question. I don't hang out with a lot of Gen Zers. So
Well, I appreciate you giving me a pass.
I will say, for those of you, there's an entrepreneurial spirit to your generation, which is actually really, really cool to witness and see. And I guess it's because there's just like so much access to ideas and exposure, and nothing is too uncool for school. Like like that's another thing. I don't know how, but everyone's either in character or they're with the program. Y'all aren't scared to try anything and make a dollar off of it. And that's really, really cool. Yeah.
What's the flip side?
On the flip side, I think that you all are definitely the generation that has been controlled by the algorithm. And that leads once again to not being scared to try anything as long as you see somebody succeeded doing it or you think they succeeded because you saw 10,000 likes.
I love that. I love that. So we're talking about, there's it's the access to information, but there's also with that overload of information, there's misinformation
Yeah.
or misdirection, right? Because everything is not
Yeah.
always as it seems.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot going on. You have to have, and you spoke about it earlier, like just passion. You have to understand why you're doing things. You have to understand how things come together. And you have to research because all of this information is not true. Everyone, just how I can post and you can post, anyone can post. You have to understand how to fact check and really follow how things come to develop.
Yeah, it's like the running joke now with Forbes 30 under 30. Like they never miss. Every year somebody comes up as a huge fraud that made the cover of that thing, you know?
Oh man, oh man. So any parting words for our audience? Is there anything else that you want to leave? How can they get involved with Assemble? How can they support? Where can they find you at?
Yeah, so all of our social media handles are assemble.fyi for your information. If you're a young executive and you have dreams of being in the C-suite of an organization, or you're an entrepreneur and you want to build something big one day and you want to understand how to become a CEO or be on the board of a company or craft your board, you can go to assemble.fyi/network. And we're, getting ready to take applications for a private community where you'll have a lot of free resources upon successful membership. And other than that, just follow us on assemble.fyi, and we're going to start kicking off things across universities and lobbying universities to really work with us to give their students what we know they deserve. And I'll say one last thing to that too. Prior to COVID, Only 26% of HBCUs had adequate online curriculum. And United Negro College Fund has stepped in to try to do some work with like 9 or 10 HBCUs. But other than that, the gap still exists. So, you know, please feel free to reach out to me, Cortney at assemble.fyi. There's no U in the name, just Cortney. And we're looking to work with leaders in education and just people that are just passionate about education in general. I mean, obviously, we're for all universities, but HBCUs are near and dear to my heart. I grew up, I went to one, and just here to try to make a change before it's too late.
Awesome. All that information will be in the bio. And as always, we do hope that this conversation sparked a new idea within you. Thank you.
Thanks, man.